Terve! Welcome to another episode of Finding Finland with your host, Rudy Owens, the podcast where we talk about all things Finland. Okay, hi, it's Rudy Owens for another episode of the Finding Finland podcast. And today I am joined from the United Kingdom by Ronan Beckman. And good morning from Portland, Oregon here. And I guess it's the afternoon there.
Yes, that's right. It's good afternoon from Northampton in England.
All right, wonderful to meet you. I hear a little bit of a British accent, so I guess you adapted to your local home country now.
Yes, I've spent over half my life abroad and over 32 years here now, I think. Yeah.
Okay, well, good. So, this is a podcast where we talk about, it's got a Finland theme. So I talked to a guy who's trying to build a sauna in Hancock, Michigan, where lots of Finns lived, and that, in my view, is a totally Finnish topic. And today's sort of Finnish topic is going to be where I'm coming into, which is my experience as at least a Finnish American, 1/4 Finnish ancestry. But we have a lot of overlap. So I'll just sort of, lay the ground thing. So I'm going to call this episode maybe Nordic roots or Baltic brotherhood. So I've just described to you, so I have Finnish ancestry, and can you just give me a little bit about your sort of Nordic ancestry too, and we can also talk about our Michigan heritage.
Yeah, sure. So I've discovered that I'm half Swedish. So, but I always kind of felt Swedish and knew I was Swedish, which I think we'll be kind of getting on to that, having that innate Scandinavian feeling.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay. I didn't know. Okay, we're two Detroiters here. This is great.
Yeah. So I was born actually just outside of Detroit in Grosse Pointe, which
Yep.
at a hospital, Bon Secours Hospital, which was a hospital that a lot of pregnant mothers who were not going to keep their babies would be having their babies. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And I was born in Detroit at Crittenden General Hospital, which was one of the major epicenters for adoption in the country, even. And it was a place that was dedicated primarily by a group that was meant to serve single mothers. And then it eventually became one of the major places where children were born and then relinquished for adoption too. So we have that bond. So I don't have to ask your age, so I can tell you mine. I was born during the Johnson administration.
Oh, right. Okay. So I was, yeah, I was Johnson's as well. I was,
Johnson.
I was trying to think when Kennedy got shot. So I was
Okay,
after.
so we definitely have some commonality there. And so you've got you said you have half Swedish ancestry. So I have 1/4 ancestry Finnish. So there's a lot of common ground there. So,
Mm.
one of the things that happened as we got to know each other basically through Twitter, like I think you found me first and you realized I was a Michigan adoptee, and we both
You read
had.
a really good book, which, yeah, I was excited to find. It's like,
That
oh my
was
God.
not a plug by me, by the way. It was completely spontaneous by Ronan. It was just nice to realize that what I was trying to address, a problem I was trying to face and find problems for, was a problem that others out there had experienced at no fault of their own, which was being part of a system that denied them their right to know who they are and where they come from. And so you probably, like me, didn't know your ancestry because we were denied that by laws, and we were only given scraps of paper, which are these sheets of paper that have vague information about our birth parents to the degree which the social workers provided that information. So can you just share, did you even know, like, when you were growing up, if you even had Swedish ancestry? Because I didn't know I had Finnish ancestry until I found my birth mother.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that, but I had a kind of unusual kind of upbringing because from the age of about 7 months until I was adopted at 4, I was living with the foster family, and this foster family actually adopted me. And kind of going back in time, like my older adopted siblings remembered my surname, and that kind of helped me in my
Ah,
search. But it was kind of piecing things together. But my surname's not a Swedish name, so
Yeah.
yeah. But I remember one time the really amazing thing that I kind of remember was I grew up when I was 12. My family all moved down to Tampa, Florida, and
Oh,
I
okay.
had a season pass for a theme park called Busch Gardens, which
Yeah.
it's great, and they had a German beer hall kind of there. And one day, a friend of mine were skiving off of high school, and we went into the gift shop at that beer hall, and I just saw a little badge. They had badges. I'm proud I'm
Yeah.
German. I'm proud I'm what Polish, and then I saw I'm proud I'm Swedish with a little Swedish flag, and I just felt compelled to buy that for some reason. I don't know why. I just did. And I
Interesting.
brought it home, and my adopted mom, really freaked out. She's like, "Who told you you're Swedish?" And just like, I don't know, I just got it. And that was kind of like, ooh, dead end to that conversation right there. Um, but yeah, for some reason, I kind of then had a little bit of a nickname as the Swede, and it kind of took on this Swedish persona.
Yeah.
Why? But my degree's in geography, and I guess I don't know. I have a strong kind of I feel really attuned to places,
Yep.
and I think there's something innate within all of us that we've kind of forgotten about
Yep.
as intelligent humans. We just kind of go for the sensible things. But
Yep.
if we go to our core beings,
Hmm.
I think there's a strong sense of place and belonging to a
Yep.
place.
Yep.
And I've had that feeling throughout my life in
Yep.
different situations, not only with my Scandi side, but also on my paternal side. I found out that I'm uh, pretty much the other half. My paternal side is Irish and Scottish,
Uh-huh.
and we were my wife and I were having a holiday on the Isle of Skye, when we first moved to the UK, and I just felt this overwhelming sense of like, I want to move here. I want to live here. And, 30 years later, come to find out that that is actually where my ancestors come from, is the Isle of Skye and on
Wow.
west coast
Wow.
of Scotland.
Wow. Well, I would not discount the importance of that connectedness at all. I think I think stories about connectedness have always been part of myth telling and whatever, they're part of our fabric about how our sort of global sense of who we are. There's always stories about going back to the place of origin and discovering one's identity. I did not have something like that in my case. I only learned that I was part Finnish when I was 24, and I had found my birth mother in Detroit. Long story, it's in my book. But I always one thing I always growing up, I always knew that I was not comfortable in extremely hot climates. So that always was my indicator that I had some sort of probably built-in thing that made me more comfortable in colder or northern climates. And then when I moved in Alaska for 6 years of my life in 2004 to 2010, and I just adapted instantly. It didn't take any time. And I quickly found my rhythm and my cadence living in the north. And it turned out to be fine. I had a lot of other issues living in Alaska, but being in the north felt really peaceful and at home to me. And I got out, and I was a winter activity person, and minus 10 degrees was not a inhibitor for me to go out and do stuff. So that was my way of feeling connected to a northern latitude, so to speak. And where if you think about where the climate and where my ancestors would have been from, so this would be South Central Finland. That's probably if you just draw the line across the globe, that would be very near, probably north of even Anchorage. So it was definitely a northern place that was part of those environments that shaped who we are as people. Had a big degree shaping our identities and our parents' lives experiences. So it's in our bones.
Yeah, it's in the genetics, I think.
Yeah, I
It's,
would
it's
I would definitely
ingrained.
agree with this. And so the thing that was also happened to me when I was in my 20s was the moment I learned that I had Finnish ancestry. I had the great benefit of knowing from my mother's side there was one family member created a really complex, detailed family tree that traced some family members back to the 1700s when Sweden was the conquering power that was ruling what is now modern day Finland. And so I knew that I could see and learned from the documents my birth mother shared when I was 24 that I had ancestors with village names and village places. And it was right then I knew I needed to go back to the village. That was
Mm.
like an instant thing. And I'm just curious, was there any sense of feeling of place, like you had a connection to a physical place that one of your ancestors came from? I'm just sort of curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think my journey, I think I told you that, genealogy is my strongest friend in my journey of kind
Uh-huh.
of finding out who I am. And I had to kind of use that as a detective skill,
Hmm.
going back, way back in time to actually then pull forward and find out who my birth family was,
Oh, okay.
to go way back in time. And that's kind of how I did it. Once I found out I was Swedish and I found my birth mother and kind of started putting into pieces together, and I started getting more and more curious about things. But going back in my family tree, I did find my great 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 grandfather in
Wow.
the land of all these Johnsons and Petersons and things. He had a really odd, unusual last name, which was Stenander. And so there's only 60 of them or so in Sweden. So
Aha.
I Googled that surname and mail shot it, a mail shot kind of in the area where I knew he had originally lived.
Yep.
And fortunately, I did get a cousin. He didn't respond, but he happened to show it to his cousin,
Uh-huh.
who was my cousin as well, who happened to be an English teacher, which is really fortunate.
Okay.
So he got in contact with me, and that was really great. And he said, come on over and visit. And he was just really, really welcoming. And so he arranged um,
What
with
you
my
can you tell me what year this is quickly? This
oh, we're talking about 2004,
okay.
2004, 2005. So he arranged out of my I was kind of searching from my mother's side of the family, so Swedish and her father's, so my grandfather's side. He was one of six children, and one of the children actually stayed in Sweden. All the other five went to USA and Canada. So there was only this one little string of direct ancestors. But my cousin found out who they were, and they still lived in the same region. They were farmers, very close to our original farm. And so one day we went out there and we visited them. And one of the greatest things that I found was, they brought out this family album of photographs that they were showing me that belonged to their great uncle. And they didn't know who a lot of those people were. And even this early in my genealogical journey, I could identify a lot of those people because they had come over to America and
Really?
Canada. I said, "Oh yeah, that's Aunt so Tekla," and that's and so I could help label that for them. But on their
But they
farm, it
had
was
this, they obviously kept it.
yeah, they just had that. I think their uncle had just recently passed away, and they said, "Oh, we got this book. Let's look through it." And so we were identifying people, but because they were on a farm, they had horses and carts, and they had a horse and cart set up for me to go on a ride, and we went on a ride to my grandfather's village in this horse and cart through the woods.
Let's tell us where are we in the geography of Sweden?
Okay, we're right in the center of
Right?
Sweden. We're nearest near the largest lake in Sweden, which is Lake Vänern.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and my grandfather grew
So
up
this
in a
is north of
small town.
Stockholm or south of Stockholm?
It's almost direct west of Stockholm. It's between Stockholm and
Okay.
Gothenburg.
Okay. Oh, Gothenburg.
Uh,
Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. Right.
so yeah, so we rode on this horse and cart to this tiny little village. And another great thing on my genealogical journey is I discovered through some paperwork of my grandfather that he had lived in this village, because you need these little clues to kind of clue you in and find out. But he lived in an extremely tiny village that had maybe 12, 13 houses. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
Amfinsrid.
Okay.
Amfinsrid is the name. So so we rode out there, and I had from a cousin in the USA that I've met kind of an old photograph from 1900 of what the original house
Oh,
looked
wow.
like. I remember going with my cousins, and we're all looking around at each house in the village, trying to figure out which one it was. And we think we found it, but it's probably been built on over time and things.
Yeah.
But
Okay, so this is what year again for you, this trip to Sweden?
yeah, yeah. So 2000, and I think it was 2004, 2005.
Okay. All right. So we're talking 2 decades ago. So
Mm.
and let's just set the stage a little better. What month of the year is this that this is happening?
Yeah, this would have been, I think it was May, because
Okay,
I
so
was,
nice time to be in Sweden. It's a good
yeah,
time to probably visit, maybe some iffy weather, maybe rain, who knows?
yeah.
Okay, and was this like the reason you went was because you
Yeah.
wanted to go? Yeah, that was the reason. And were you with your wife or
No, my wife and my little baby daughter, we went before I had met up with these cousins, before I even knew anything about my background. Around 2003,
Mhm.
we took a trip to Gothenburg. Now, I'm fortunate, I live near London.
Yeah,
We had flights for £5 in the day, so it was really cheap, cheaper than a bus. Right? So
that's
we could,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I remember looking through the archives and trying to, gather and figure out who these people were, who the ancestors
yep,
were, where they lived. And so I was laying some of the groundwork in the days before the internet had all of this. Now, this job is easier for people nowadays because
yep,
all these books have been kind of put online, and you
correct.
can research much easier.
Yeah. Do,
But
do, do, do the Swedish, like in Finland, which I thought was amazing, you have two big databases that are available. One is maintained by the Genealogical Society of Finland, and I interviewed one of their people last week and was sort of talking about that. There's someone else, a private person, who just took the names and created a public database of names. I believe this is the case, and I could be wrong. Enter them into a database, and then you can just type the surname, family surname, and then
mm,
it will create a heat map and show you where where the dispersals of the names are. So if you have an uncommon name, that's one way you can possibly trace down because of the geolocations of those as that. And so it's just that they have some good church registry records and names records that they've been able to create this database.
I'm just amazed. I'm not sure if Finland's the same, but in Sweden, the Lutheran Church kept a track of every single person and
Correct.
did what was virtually a census
Yep.
every year.
Same in
So
Finland.
they
That's
kept
that's
complete
correct.
track of where everyone was. I'm not sure if in Finnish they have patronymic names like they do in Sweden. So that's the biggest problem with surnames in Sweden is Johnson is really the son of John, and
Aha.
Peterson, yeah. So it changes every generation until
Gotcha.
very
Oh,
recently.
okay. No, I think in Finnish, I mean, there are, because of Swedish conquest and occupation, as some Finns may call it, or
Mhm.
whatever what you want to call it, greater
There are
Sweden.
some Swedish speakers in
I mean,
in
like
Finland.
my
That's
my
native
family name
speaking.
was
Yeah.
Nelson, right? So that was my
Mm.
great grandfather's name. So Isaac Nelson. Obviously, there's some Swede. There was some, and it was on the coastal area where there would have been the Swedish interaction just with trade and commerce and marriage taking place. And, one of the earliest ancestors of it's a Torn is the name, which I think is a Swedish name. And then there was a Magdalena Anders. So I definitely have some Swedes in there. And I don't know if they were changing names that way or not. So that the
Yeah.
Finnish names start intermingling in as the generations go on in my case. So, wow. Okay. So when you did this trip, really, that was your trip. This wasn't a holiday. This was a family
No,
trip.
no. It was 5 days, and it was great because my cousin had time off. We were both teachers, so I think it was
Okay.
holidays that week. But he just kind of took me in his car, and we just went anywhere that I wanted to go, and anything associated with my family. So this great grandfather, he has a photograph of this great great grandfather, the Stenander, Sven Stender,
Uh-huh.
Sven Stenander. And I had from a cousin in the USA gotten a poem, and which was outlining his life, and he'd never seen that poem before, so we could trade information, and so
Yeah.
we were kind of tracking the steps of my great 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 grandfather, and he was a real character. So I've written a short story about him that's about to be published in
Okay.
November. So um, yeah, so it was just amazing to be able to do that, and nothing kind of really replaces actually being there and absorbing and feeling that. But
No,
failing,
I, I, I
yeah,
will, I'll sort of sign my signature to that line. Exactly. And so it sounds like you got nothing but support from your relatives. So how did that make you feel to have someone in a country that you've never met, but
mm,
but there was obviously enough trust to say, yeah, you're my kin. So what kind of bonds did that
yeah.
were that like, and what did it feel like to you?
It's just amazing. I mean, it's a real leap of faith to be doing that. Say, hey, I'm a stranger. I happen to know that these people I'm related to,
Yep.
and I think you're a cousin. Write me back, and for them to write back and invite me over and be so accommodating. That's just amazing. And
Yeah.
for me, I'm sure you have the same feeling too. It's trying to be in a place where you see people that look like you. Uh, I remember meeting a cousin. My daughter had a mole on her
Uh-huh.
nose, and I met a cousin that had a mole in the
Wow.
same area. And seeing pictures of my grandfather who lived in Amfinsred, he looks exactly like me. We
Yeah.
could be twins,
Yeah.
and that's really powerful for an adoptee,
No, I'm gonna vouch that, yeah, because okay, so like so my quest in my case, I knew I had my Finnish ancestry, but I never had the time to do my trip. And in my case, I finally, just because so many things have happened in life, dealing with my mother dying of Alzheimer's, my adoptive mother for years, that took up a lot of my time. Then the pandemic hit, and I have a sister who's not doing well, so I've sort of had to be sort of a distant caregiver. I just delayed this trip and it just delayed. And finally I said, I got to do it. Pandemic ends. I said, I'm going to Finland last year. And like today I saw on Facebook, it's my anniversary where I bought my ticket. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to my villages. And so in my case, my villages are in two communities. One's called Kortisjärvi and the other's called Alaharma. And these are south central. So if you're on a map, you would see the city of Vasa here, and then up here is Oulu. So Oulu is right near Sweden. So this is sort of south central, and it's farming country. It's sort of flat. They've cleared the lands and they've been farming there forever. So obviously there were tenant poor farmers, peasant farmers in my ancestry. So I knew I was going to go to the villages, but I said, let's see if I can find the family. And the family had stopped connecting for 50 years because they used to write each other and they were in touch. And even my great grandmother, who was born in Finland in this area called South Ostrobothnia, where the majority of Finns who emigrated to Michigan and Minnesota and Ontario lived. Um, so she's visited, but she came from a family, I think five five siblings, and she was very close to one there. And so they lost touch, even they were writing through the 1940s in Finnish letters being sent to America, to Finland from my Finnish speaking ancestors in the USA. And I just had only names to go by that were on the tree. And I tried different avenues, contacted the Genealogical Society of Finland. They were helpful. They said I could hire a genealogist. And I said, let's see if I can do it another way. And then I just began looking for the names of people that it sort of the tree stopped in the 1950s. Some uncommon names. One was Unkari, which was a some say it's a Hungarian name. So the Finnish language is Uralic, and it's connected to Estonian and somewhat to to Hungarian. And
Mhm. Yeah.
so it was Unkari, that was one. And I think it was because of that, I contacted someone who had that as a surname, and I contacted her. She turned out to be a professor, wonderful woman named Satu. And she said, and then so she had a hyphenated name, and I think it was her husband's hyphenated name. And I sent her an email, and she trusted it, and she felt I was legitimate because I had all these resources online. And she said, I think I know some people in this part of Finland. Let me send a personal message. And then she found out that they were on Facebook. And then a personal message was left on a Facebook page from this person who they didn't know, but she had a personal connection to this town where a couple of them live. And based on that Facebook page connection,
Mm.
one of them trusted it, and she gave them. He replied back, and he realized it wasn't a hoax. And then another relative who would be my great aunt. So he's my cousin, she's my aunt, contacted me like the same day, said like this is, and it was in August, and it was 3 weeks before I left, and they said, you know, we have now made connection. We are your relatives, because I sent them the family tree picture. I sent them a 24-page list of my family members, so they knew it was real. And they said, we'd like to meet you. And then I visited, and then I stayed. I even stayed with my aunt on that first trip. She let me stay at her home with her and her husband. That was just mind-boggling how they would just be so nice, and they just invited me into their house, and they served me moose soup, because they're all hunters in Finland. All the guys are hunters in this family. And then the next day, 2 days later, I was in the city of Tampere, which is sort of closer to Helsinki, sauna capital of the world, and then met more of my cousins and an aunt and their kids. And so they just greeted me as me.
Mm.
And I think one of the reasons why was because I resembled my aunt. Her name is Merja. 2 sons. I resemble the youngest son more distinctly. And if my angle of my face is this way and his angle is this way, and you compare the pictures, when I shared those with people, they thought it was a picture of me. And this is a 3-generation separation. So I think that one, it's that recognition of the person's genetic kinship. It's visible, I think. And
Yeah.
then the other is just knowing you have an ancestor, you trust them enough, and then you just want to connect. And I can't explain. I didn't do anything special, but they wanted to meet me in a way that no one in the United States has ever been wanting to meet me
Yeah.
as an adoptee relative. It was much
So
different.
I'm wondering if, it is a big deal for Scandinavians because, about, a fifth or a quarter of the population from Sweden, Norway,
Mhm.
Denmark, and Finland have all emigrated to North America in
Yep.
particular.
Yep.
So I know genealogy is a big deal in Sweden. I
Yep.
imagine it is in Finland as
Yep.
well too. So for many of them, it was intriguing to put the pieces together. What happened to these
Yep.
families that appeared? One of the funny things that, they showed when I saw my cousins on the farm. This is my aunt, the only one that actually stayed out of all the siblings that
Okay.
emigrated. And all the children used to tease her by saying, "Oh, they didn't want you, so you had to stay behind." So she was the only one that stayed behind. But yeah, for me to be able to give something back, a little bit of, how funny it was that I knew pictures and photographs that they had in albums that they didn't know. So we could trade information and trade stories. That was brilliant.
So can you just quickly summarize again what distant relationship, how far back in your family tree did the immigrants go back? So what generation back?
Yes. So it was my grandfather and his 2 sisters. They all left at different times. My
Okay.
grandfather, his 2 sisters, and 2 brothers. So
That's a
they
big,
all emigrated to North America,
wow.
and there was only one sister that was left behind. So, um, yeah, yeah, and
And
she was, I think, having to take care of the elderly family and that
yep.
kind of.
Yep. So always the woman who is given the task to be the caregiver, always.
Yeah.
It's still the
But
same today.
I don't know if you can see that, but that's a picture of my grandfather.
Okay. Wow, he had a nice, healthy set of hair.
Yeah. And I think particularly, when I did my whole adoption search, I think that, I kept my expectations low. I only wanted to find a photograph of my mother, and I got so much more in the end, so I just like won the jackpot, I felt like. And, so I kept discovering more and more and going further back than I ever imagined possible, and I think that was just so lucky and fortunate. It's hard. I put in the work. I'm
Yeah, you
sure
have
you
to
did
put in the work.
well,
There's no
but
shortcuts. Nope.
I think it's easier now than even than when I did it. There's a picture of all the emigrating siblings.
Oh,
So
wow, that's a
my
wonderful shot.
grandfather's there. My
Very
grandfather's there.
cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. I see it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the two other brothers wound up in Alberta and Canada, and these two were in Moline in Illinois, which had a huge Swedish population working for John Deere tractor factories.
Right. A big powerhouse. Yeah. All right. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So you have your connection is a little closer in it when we speak about photographs. So when I was visiting my aunt, Mertja, she went into, I think, a box that was in, she grew up in this town called Kurica, and Kurica is not far, about an hour by driving from our villages. And so her grandmother was my great grandmother's sister. So they had a very close connection. And so she pulled out a box. There's still a house that's owned by my other aunt in Kurica, and it had photographs and letters that were sent by the US relatives to the Finnish relatives through the 1940s. And they were written in Finnish. And there were all these family photographs. And in the family photographs were photographs of my biological mother as a child and her twin brother and the family members. And there was this box of photographs from America sent to Finland, sitting in someone's closet for decades. The American comes, they come off the shelf, and now I've got the photographs that
Yeah,
are just there of my family in the USA, which was
yeah.
and they were commenting on similarities of how certain family members when they were younger looked like certain family members when they were younger in the USA. Everyone was making those notes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. It's funny you mentioned a picture of your mother because I had the same. I found a picture in their photo album and all these letters from my mother had a half brother, and so there was pictures of him and of my grandfather kind of sending that. And yeah, there was this picture of my mom
Oh,
there, which
wow.
is great. Yeah.
Love that haircut.
Yeah. So 1920s. So yeah, that's great.
Wow, that's really great. That, yeah, it was just remarkable. These stories, like the one you're telling me and the one I'm hearing, just make me realize that, every single one of us has something like this in our past, right? Every one of us,
Yeah.
right? And it just proves to me how maddening it is that there are laws that just tell you, these millions of adoptees, you can't know this.
Yeah.
You're just not allowed to know this. And this stuff to me is just so soul enriching. Like
Mm.
I've become a complete Finnish cultural nerd. I've gone full dive, full deep end,
Yeah.
but it's also very rewarding because I'm learning about another place. I'm learning about their history, but I'm also learning about how they do things in Finland and Sweden. Both do very well in all these global indices for how they care for their kids, care for their working families, have a very good healthcare system, and we can learn from these countries,
Yeah.
and and then take that knowledge and bring it back. And all these people are denied this opportunity to learn from the home countries to enrich our own lives here.
Well, I think one of the things that you said really kind of hits hard, and is that you and I both kind of had that heritage stolen from us.
Yeah.
We never had the opportunities to learn firsthand about that heritage and what those traditions kind of meant.
Mhm.
So they mean more. I think a lot of people take these things for granted if you've always been growing up with these things, and you might ignore a lot of
Yeah.
the.
No, and you assimilate, and it's that story. I'm reading the book right now on the history of Finns in Michigan, and that story is how by the second generation, all the traditions of the Finns, their social laws, the importance of their churches, they were very strong labor activists in Michigan and Minnesota. Those just began to erode as they became more part of the American mainstream, and then they needed to further distance themselves during the Red Scare eras, et cetera, so they wouldn't be seen as socialists or communists when there was a very strong labor socialist fiber. They created community halls wherever they were, and they were involved in advocating for workers' rights and resource extraction areas like northern Minnesota and northern Michigan. So all those things that were probably good traditions got smothered and lost along the way.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
the melting pot of America. That's what.
One thing that I just wanted to share, when I was writing my book, I quoted Alex Haley, the guy who created, he really landed, in my view, like a thunderclap in the American consciousness and culture, and particularly in sort of bringing the importance of slavery front and center in the American discussion, and then making clear that ancestry was literally just wiped out for millions of African Americans who were brought here in chattel slavery and bondage, and they had their past just destroyed and erased, and they were renamed and became property. Just a litany of sins. And in that story that I watched as a young guy, and I was just mesmerized by the importance in this family of continuing the oral traditions and knowing who they were and knowing where they came from and feeling a connectedness to a place, which in this case was Gambia, the ancestral home of Kunta Kinte, one of his great ancestors. And that to me, as an adoptee, was just sort of I was just on this. I get it. And so I was totally, enraptured by that story and what I would consider be his wisdom that he was trying to share with the world, which is we're all family. We all have families. Family is who we are. And I quoted, I just want to share this quote with you. And he wrote, "In all of us, there is a hunger, marrow deep, to know our heritage, to know who we are and where we have come from. Without this enriching knowledge, there is hollow yearning. No matter what our attainments in life, there is still a vacuum, an emptiness, and this most disquieting loneliness." I have never read anything that better describes that feeling of not being connected. I don't know. Have you did Alex Haley in any way pop up in your mind, or is this just me? I always just wonder. It's no one else really I know talks about it, but Alex Haley for me was my guru.
Yeah, no, I never really watched Roots when I was a high school student, I think, when it came out.
Yeah.
So that didn't hit with me. But I remember actually, now that you're mentioning it, I was a substitute teacher in Florida for a while,
Uh-huh.
and I met a woman when I was substitute teaching at this middle school, and I was watching this class, taking them to the library, and they had a speaker, and this was this woman, and she followed that journey of Alex Haley, and she did
Uh-huh.
it for herself. She was African American
Uh-huh.
heritage, and she had, and this is in the days before the internet and everything. It
Right.
must have been difficult. She journeyed to Africa, and she wrote a book,
Really?
self-published a book, all about her journey. Most amazing woman, yeah. So I felt a real almost instant kinship with her because
Right.
the journey that I know, and she battled and she did it. Um, for me, I always had that questions, I speaking adoption wise, I probably had, uh, the most ideal kind of situation. I had a good situation, so I'm very happy with how that came out, but not everybody does.
No.
Even though I had a positive
Hmm.
kind of outcome, I still had that innate need. And I remember I was just really determined to break down those barriers, those walls.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I met another girl who was adopted, and we were kind of a support kind of system for each other. And we used to kind of talk and chat. But, back in those days, in the 80s, early 80s, we had no way of making this happen. We were really up against it in the system.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and then, when I was in my mid 30s, I just decided, no, I need to get this sorted. I need to do that. And I often,
Married at that time?
yes, I was married, yeah, and we were planning a family, and sometimes that's the
That
catalyst.
was that a trigger?
Often it is. I think I had that anyways, but I finally, maybe that was the little push to do that. So we just stopped at uh, Children's Services the Child Services of Detroit, which I think, they handled my adoption,
Hmm.
to ask kind of, what can I find out? Where can I go and stuff? And it just started a litany of kind of frustration. I mean, they were nice to my face and everything, but they were in the process of moving all the records over to Lansing, the state capital.
Okay, right. Which
And
Michigan law, if they close down, they become the official repository of these
yeah,
records.
yeah.
Yep.
So I had to kind of wait on the journey until the records went there. And they said, they transferred my request to Lansing, and okay, that's fine. And I was just, knowing that we had this interview, I kind of went through all my paperwork, and I waited years having frustrating letters going back and forth. While we're waiting, we're sifting through the records now. Now we're trying to organize the records. And now
I'm
we're trying
sorry.
to,
It
yeah,
just, it just taught me how bureaucracy works when I
yeah,
got,
yeah.
yeah, it just,
I mean, to be fair, I mean, I think the people in Lansing at the Department of Health were okay by me. At the end of the day, they could see my frustration. And after a year and a half, 2 years of keep requests, and my records were lost. But they did find the records of my younger half brother, which none of us really knew existed.
wow.
But they kind of we say a whiteout Tipex. It was in the days just before. It was perfect timing because it's before
I
computers.
had the whiteout
Yeah,
Xerox deal.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they forgot to white out some vital
Yes.
information, which was really important,
Yeah.
and that mentioned, a whole bunch of things that were leads that I could actually then start following to trace my birth family. But I refused to take no for an answer because
Yep.
I was like, you're sitting behind that desk, you know my history. Why
Yep.
can't I know my own history?
Yep.
It's so unfair.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let it.
I remember I went into the office of the social worker at I think it was Lutheran Family Service, Child and Family Services. That became, I think, Lutheran Family Services in Metro Detroit. And I arranged to meet the woman who was the social worker. That was my point of contact when I flew to Detroit in April of 1989, right around my 24th birthday. And so she had the file. She had the literal file in front of her, sitting on her desk, and I am 3 feet away from it. I'm looking at that file that has all of my information, and I'm not allowed to know what's in it at all.
Yeah.
And it was this disproportionate power relationship I was feeling.
Mm,
I was feeling, I was just, it was just sort of like it defies logic, it defies reason,
mm,
it defies sense of fairness or anything. And the thing she didn't know was that I had already found out who my birth mother was. And what I was doing was basically fact checking her to see if she would make a slip and reveal information that could confirm what I had found. Because in my story, I used those whiteouts, and then I could trace the school where my birth mother and birth uncle went, and then found their names through a yearbook, and instantly I recognized them. So I had their names, and then I just needed to get double confirmation from her. So she provided it, and I could see on the file name it was on the file externally. And it's just that level of, to me, it's just sort of like an individual holding like a bureau, is not papers, it's someone's life, and they're controlling it. And it just, I will never forget what I learned that day. It stuck with me the rest
You
of my
were you were so young when I just really admired your tenacity at that young of
Well,
an
I
age.
mean, no, but you're describing what it's not, well, I was tenacious, yeah. I was stubborn. And so in my case, I always wondered if my stubbornness was, I have two reasons for the stubbornness. One, because everyone said my maternal grandfather, Owens, Welsh, they were just stubborn people as well. So was that a characteristic of them? But was there some sort of biological thing? And then on the Finnish side, they're famous for their tenacity and their stubbornness, which they call sisu, which is the ability to endure and not be knocked down, but to get back up and never ever just surrender, despite the circumstances, and just keep going on. And I always wondered if that was sort of like I got the gift of that. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I'm a very easygoing guy, but
Yeah, you seem that
I
way.
just when it came to that, it made me really angry. So I kept going on because they had lost my records in Lansing. Finally, I've noticed, 4 years after I started that process with the Children's Aid
Yeah,
Society in Detroit,
yeah.
they finally wrote me a letter and said, we had your half brother, but we kept looking. Your records are officially lost. We found a card index of cases, and that really upset me because that's my life.
Yeah,
My life is in that file
yeah,
and it's gone.
yeah.
They recommended that I contact the court where my adoption took place. So I
Okay.
did. And that was a really interesting story because I frequently go to see my siblings in Detroit area. So, once a year or something, I would go in
Cool.
there with my
Cool.
wife. I haven't been for a while, but I used to. And anyways, I had made this request and everything. And so finally, I was saying to my wife, oh, it's been about 6 months since I requested the court for my documents and sent it. And it's not easy for us here. You can go and get a notarized signature quite easily in the USA. I have to go to a solicitor or a lawyer
Okay.
and pay about $100. And,
Okay.
it's not easy. But anyways, we did it. Um, so I said, let's stop by the courthouse. We're driving by. We were in Macomb County. And I said, let's go and Warren. Let's go and drive here. And so we walked into the offices of the family services. And I said to the secretary behind the desk who I was, and I was just wanting to check up how the color drained from her face. And she goes, I just typed that this morning. I got the report here. And so, they had the anonymized report. And so they were handing it to me again. It didn't tell me anything that I didn't know already,
Okay.
really, but that that's the difference over those few years. It went from the whited out kind of document to here's a typed, edited, redacted,
Yeah.
here you go.
Yeah.
This is our version.
Yeah.
But I could interview them right there and then and say, my big question at that point in time was, what about my father? And they said, well, there was no mention of your father in your records. And I kind of understand that now, having gone through all the things and genetic testing, DNA testing has kind of helped solve that mystery. It wasn't
Oh, you
available
did that.
I did, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah,
I
that's
have
another
not.
story. It's
No,
another
no,
story.
it's always
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, so I left there not knowing anything about my father, and I just had to accept I will never know about my father, and that's that.
that's hard.
Uh, but genetic testing did get me over that hurdle, but I had to wait a decade or so. And, yeah.
Yeah. This long waits, I just think with me, I waited a while. Took me, my search took me 2 years till I cracked the case, right? And the only reason I could do it is because I didn't have any other commitments in my life, and
Yeah.
we all have to make priorities in life, and we have to choose what is the one that's going to bubble up to the top. And somehow I was able to make it bubble up to the top more frequently every day than other people can do. And it's really frustrating for me personally to see people doing this later in life. So many they're
You miss
40.
opportunities to see the people that can answer your questions. And I think time is running out for a lot of people of our age,
Yeah,
because we can't, we're lucky because we persevered and we were able to find out what that heritage is and make those
yeah,
connections with
yeah.
people. But a lot of people can't.
No, they won't. I mean, and it's just for public awareness for those who may be watching. Michigan had two bills that could have opened up records in Michigan. This is state law. So there was a bipartisan effort to do that, and it was defeated by the odd coalition that is against adoptee rights, which are progressives on the ACLU front, and then conservatives on the
It's a
Catholic Conference Michigan front, and those who are pro quote unquote pro lifers who need to ensure that the adoption system remains unchecked. And one way they can do that is to ensure that that adoptees are denied their rights to know their parents. And this is all how it works out in the political sphere. And it was shot down, and a Democratic governor did nothing. Governor Whitmer did not intervene when she could have. And I'm familiar with state legislative processes, and bills are watched by legislative directors, and legislative directors write reports at the end of the week and then send it to the chief of staff. And there's no way Governor Whitmer did not know what was going on with this bill. I can assure you that. And she chose to do nothing.
Yeah,
So,
I think they're all fooling themselves though nowadays because I think DNA has blown the doors open
yep,
completely.
yep.
And so if you think you can keep that secret, it's going to happen at
They
some point.
admitted it in testimony. A
Hmm.
lawmaker asked, like, doesn't this like make your point like sort of illogical? And she
Yeah,
admitted it publicly. And yet she
yeah.
still advocated for it.
Mm. It's strange bedfellows as well too. I can't believe the ACL like you
Of Michigan. It's the
yeah.
ACLU of Michigan, but yeah, we'll just leave it there. I get very frustrated with that. But anyway, well, I actually have thought about doing ancestry testing too. I know my biological father's side. I actually met my half sister he has two daughters. I've met one of my half sisters, so I know them. I've met an aunt, biological aunt as well. So I just don't know their family story. I don't know their family health history so well. So there's these question marks which I would like to know. And then, if I do the test, I will probably find a second or third cousin maybe in the USA, and that could open up a can of worms for people. And
You know what I found, Rudy, is actually the second and third cousins are further back to not be so engrossed or ingrained in
okay,
the family politics,
yep,
but they are near enough to actually know what's
right.
going on.
They've
And
got the
he says,
breadcrumbs.
"Oh, I know about great granddad, blah blah blah," and he had a girlfriend on the side. So you can
Those
find all the
stories
family
just
secret.
always get shared, don't they?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
share. They pass down through our oral traditions, and just the nature of we want to tell stories and we
yeah,
want to share our secrets,
yeah,
and there are no secrets.
yeah.
I even I'll share with one thing quickly with you. My birth mother died in April, and it was long in coming, and it was hard for her, obviously, but we all knew it was coming, just because of life. And even after her death, I learned family secret about me, that has been kept, but it was revealed, and no one's gonna, they all come out. These secrets all come out. Even in death, the secrets still trickle down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Interesting. There are no, you can't keep it. Can't keep it locked away.
yeah.
Uh,
So okay, so pivoting back to the Nordics. So I'm planning to, I'm pretty sure I'm going to go back again. I'm pretty
mhm.
sure right now I am going to write a book. I'm right now, jumping into this sort of Finnish thing, finding Finland. It's sort of it's a question. What is Finland? So I like this as an exercise of learning and meeting people, and it's very fun for me. And I want to go back again and see if I've got the makings of a story, because I already wrote a 9,000 word story. Do you have any stories you're going to be telling relating to Sweden and your?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I've got like I was saying, I've done a short story that's based on my great 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 grandfather's life. So I got some really interesting characters. So like my
Okay.
my grandfather's father was in prison in Sweden in the 1860s for counterfeiting coins, and he had to spit, so uh, yeah, there's all kinds of interesting kind of stories like
Huh?
that. But I think, for me, there's another side. My grandmother's side I didn't know much about, but I kind of, not too distant past, kind of connected and put pieces together on that side. And I was so lucky because I happened to be a cousin of one of Sweden's most premier genealogists who's on television and has written a book and a whole
Oh,
family history tome about that big, outlining all the families and things. Again, it was just, oh, I wish you would have been in contact with me 3 years ago when Aunt so and so Helga could have answered some of the, because she actually knew my grandmother and that kind of thing. So, but it is what it is. But I'm glad I made that connection to actually know and we actually had friends in Northampton who were Swedish and they've moved back to Sweden. So I do also have that connection there. So we can go back and feel at home and have a visit with them as well.
that's
So
cool.
I'm eager to get back and explore Sweden more. Ironically, my wife has seen more Sweden than I have because
Okay.
she's involved in some European Union educational projects in the past and had several trips there, and I was very envious that I couldn't go.
Yeah,
Um,
I love Sweden. I went back for the first time in decades. I briefly stopped in Stockholm. I took the ferry from Turku to Stockholm, which is awesome. I think,
yeah,
God, I love that. And I arrived in Stockholm and I only had one day and it was brilliant.
yeah,
I could live there, you know. And then I,
yeah,
I got I got on the train to Malmo and took it over to it was just like ridiculously easy to travel and you know, I just had a great time. I mean, it was wonderful. I'd love to spend some time there and love to spend I would love to have a little cottage by one of their little
Oh,
communities.
it's beautiful. All the little islands, like in Stockholm, it's the same in Gothenburg.
Yeah,
We took little ferries to little islands where
yeah.
people are living on these islands and they commute every day into the big city.
I did that. I did that. I went to Boxholm, which is
Yeah.
it's about a 1 hour trip by local ferry. You can take it from Stockholm, and it was one of these Rick Steves like do this, and it's like okay, let's trust Rick, and Rick was totally
Yeah.
right. It was great.
Yeah.
It was one of the
Yeah.
best parts of my entire trip. So,
Yeah.
well, I
Cool.
hope you get back. You know,
Yeah.
more life and yourself, and you know,
Yeah. Well, I'm retiring soon, and so I have no excuse. It's close to, and the airfares aren't as bad. It's harder to plan for that from North America, but
yeah.
I have less excuse for that.
Yeah, okay, that's really cool. All right, well, good luck on that, and your next writing adventures. And so I guess maybe we can just end this. So, both of us, have, again, t the tale of two adoptees from Michigan with roots in the Baltics, with roots in the Nordic countries, who who persevered, who got lucky as well. Let's admit luck had a role in it, who found family, who are living, breathing family. So like one thing I tell people, my what I want to tell people is you have family out there and they probably want to know who you are and they probably care about you. I'm wondering what your thoughts are and what you would tell the people who don't know that yet.
Yeah, yeah. I think, be brave enough to take the challenge and try. One thing that I did was trying to find addresses and try to write actual letters because
Uh-huh.
I sometimes if you get something in the post,
Yep.
it's a little bit more tangible and it seems a little bit less dodgy than that
That's
email that's come
that's not a
from.
scam.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So, that would be a tip that I would give.
Yep.
Um, you know, you, if you can find on Facebook, at least, nothing else, you can kind of Facebook
You
stalk
can
and
see
see,
them.
see who the families are.
Right.
Uh, it's great with kind of if you can't travel, with Google and Google Maps, you can actually drop yourself right in there and actually have a
I did
look
that.
around.
I went to my villages first by Google Earth, right? And
Yeah,
Google
yeah,
Maps. I'm like, there's the church, and then I found myself at that church,
yeah,
a
yeah,
month later.
yeah. And I think the more you get into that and trying to make those connections and discovering stories. You know, I wrote to a cousin in the USA, and once you start making those connections, it's, oh yeah, I have all these photos, and you know, there's little pockets of stories in each of these cousins, and sometimes
Right.
with the passage of time, they haven't been linked, and
Yep.
you can be the ones that actually
Yes.
help to bring these stories back together,
I That
which has
happened
been
to me.
amazing.
I
Yeah,
I was in Tampere in Corica in the winter, and it was a chance for a family meal where there were some distant cousins who connected, all because I was sort of like the shiny object that came into town, so they had an
yeah,
excuse, and everyone had a wonderful. We had a party, we had
yeah.
a dinner,
Oh, it
and
was the same with my English teacher
enjoyed
cousin.
it.
I mean, he's a distant cousin to these cousins that were on the farm that we went, and that made a connection for them that,
Yeah.
you know, was really cool.
No, I think it matters to them too. They realize that they have these ties within their own networks that are maybe getting a little
Yeah.
whatever forgotten or loose, and they then they feel the warmth of family. You know,
Mm.
realizing families have tensions and problems and divisions and all the things that you know that Shakespeare wrote about so brilliantly. But there's also the very positive side too, and hopefully, you know that stranger can bring out the goodness in people, and they can find that goodness in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's been such a wonderful experience, you know, and beyond my dreams of expectations. I always keep my expectations quite low, and so I can be pleasantly surprised by little things. But I've had,
That's very Nordic, by the way.
is it right?
I think the expression is now I don't speak Swedish, but is it lågjam? I think it means to not to not to keep have your expectations like at a minimal level such that you're always satisfied with regardless of what's happening in life. And therefore
Mm.
you're happier because you don't expect like like a fairy tale to be happening in your life.
And I think that's it really interesting because on the adoptee side of things, we only hear those wonderful, heartwarming kind of stories of you know, the families reunite and they're all hugging and crying and it's lovely.
Yeah,
And sometimes that happens, and I had little bits of that, but
I
you know,
didn't.
I went in expecting to have doors slammed in my face because I've met adoptees who've had that happen.
Yep.
You know, or you
Me.
know,
Happened to
adoptees.
me.
Yeah,
Happened to
yeah, I
me.
remember reading about that, you know, you know, and vice versa. There's a lot of adoptees that are made to feel guilty for going on that journey of a
Sure.
search. That's very difficult for them.
Yep.
Um, you know, so yeah, just do it. You
Yeah,
only have to
I
live.
would agree. I would agree.
Yeah.
It's worth the risk. And
Mm.
you know, again, and all I can say is, you know, if you're so lucky and you can connect to that place of origin, the rewards will be many, and you should follow that sound, right? I describe it as sort of the siren song of Odysseus. You'll hear the siren, and it won't be the rocks, it will be something different, and hopefully you know it will end well. But if that siren takes you to the village, I hope you can go to the village. That's sort of what I would say.
Yeah. I was just going to recommend anybody with a kind of Nordic heritage.
Yeah.
There is a novelist that my cousin in Sweden
Yeah.
got onto. He's really famous, and all the Swedish school students read these novels. It's by Wilhelm Moberg, and
Okay.
it's called The Emigrants, and it's about late 1800s Swedish emigrants, farmers going to Minnesota, I think, and
Okay.
actually setting up a farm. But you can see the hardships of that journey, the emigrants' journey, and
Mhm.
all the hardships that they had once they arrived in America. And it was really interesting to think of what our ancestors had to go through. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't the promised land right away. You had to really work at it and go through all the hardships and the dangers
Yep.
and heartbreak. You know,
Yep.
it's a very moving series of novels, a series of three novels.
Okay.
It's really puts the history in perspective, even though it kind of took place like a generation or two before my grandparents
Right.
emigrated, I say,
Right.
but it's really interesting.
Okay. Well, Ronan, I've taken up a lot of your time. So what we can do is we can just do a wrap here. I just want to thank you for joining me for the
Well,
Finding
thank you for
Finland
having me.
podcast, and it's
I've
great.
been following you for ages, and I loved your book, and it was so cool to say, hey, there's a guy from Michigan who's adopted and is Scandinavian.
And he's a stubborn cuss. Yeah,
We
so
need it.
great. Well, anyway, I hope we can connect again. Maybe I'll
Ooh,
get to the UK. You know, you never
yeah,
know. I got to get to
yeah.
Wales, so a UK trip is bookmarked somewhere in the near future. So that has to happen for me. I've done Finland, so Wales is next for me because I'm an Owens. So there you go.
Cool.
All right. All right. Well,
Take,
good luck. Have a wonderful summer as summer
thank
gets
you.
rolling in the UK. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you again. Kiitos vielä kerran for spending time with us today on the Finding Finland podcast. Be sure to visit us for more conversations about all things Finland. Remember, you can find all the podcast episodes on your favorite podcasting platform by visiting the Finding Finland webpage. See you again soon.